And that brings us to our next topic. Today we're going to be talking about some staple cards from the cEDH metagame, which are available surprisingly cheaply for anyone to pick up. And we're going to try to use this as an opportunity to discuss some cards that are very powerful in cEDH that we think will be powerful at regular tables as well. Our rule is all the cards on the list at the time of recording this episode, all of these cards cost $5 or less. And we're going to break it up and we're going to talk about creatures, then we're going to talk about instants and sorceries, and then we're going to pick our favorite from non-creature permanents, artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers, and lands. All of these are coming from a Moxfield list of cEDH staples. Jake, who is that being managed by?
This list is curated by Nullmage on Moxfield. You can just search for cEDH staple cards. We will also include a link to it in the description. It looks like at the time of recording it was updated 2 hours ago, so this is something that constantly gets updated. This pulls off the deck list database, and they go through that big list and curate it to a list of currently 202 cards that are seen across a certain percentage of decks, and they get added in here.
And we're going to start out by talking about the creatures that we think are interesting to discuss that we would like new players to be more aware of and can be obtained affordably. Something that is a bit of a rarity in Magic these days. So I'll get us started, and I'm going to talk about Notion Thief. Notion Thief is a card that I really enjoy. This is a human rogue for 2 blue, black. So in Dimir colors, this is a 3/1 with flash. If an opponent would draw a card, except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, instead that player skips that draw and you draw a card. So it is a replacement effect to come in and steal other people's cards. This is a powerful addition to my Opus Thief deck, a card that I still love, and I think it is still useful outside of Opus Thief decks. At a relatively low cost of 4 mana, it provides a powerful impact on a game where one of the most powerful things you can do is draw additional cards. You can wait to just play gotcha on somebody if you expect them to be playing a draw spell or triggering a lot of draw effects off of a commander like Gorvald. This could be a really powerful addition to any deck that is including blue and black. It is affordable at only $1.64 as of the time that we are recording this in US dollars. And I just really like this card.
It's very powerful. It has a lot of flexibility. You can use it as a punisher for other players being greedy, or you can be proactive and do lots of symmetric draw effects and wind up profiting off of those. Yeah, I like it.
Having been on the opposite end of a Notion Thief plenty of times, I can definitely say it is a powerful card with a powerful effect.
What is our next card that we're going to talk about, Jake?
I'm going to talk about Simian Spirit Guide. It is a red ape spirit for 2 generic and a red, a 2/2, and the text it has is exile Simian Spirit Guide from your hand, add red. This is a color-shifted version of the Elvish Spirit Guide originally printed in Alliance, which is the exact same text but green. One of the large differences of note is that Elvish Spirit Guide is like $17, and Simian Spirit Guide is about a quarter right now, so 25 cents. This is just some really cheap ramp, so if you have any kind of offensive strategy where you just need to hit that critical mass of mana in one turn, this is a card that is mana positive, so you will actually gain mana the turn that you deploy it, unlike a substantial number of mana rocks or mana dorks. So if you have any method of like mass card draw and get this into your hand, it will help you fuel the rest of the cards that you drew that turn.
It's a powerful little ritual. It is essentially 0 mana going down a card and you get an additional red mana. Not every deck needs to be running rituals. You can see our episode from last week where we talked about how to ramp responsibly, and that might give you a little bit more guidance, but I really love Simian Spirit Guide, and I'm glad to see that it is an affordable card.
I'm a big fan of it too. It's done a lot of work on Winota for me when I've been working on trying to get a Winota out relatively early. Simian Spirit Guide has never been a dead card in hand for me, at least in my experiences playing with it.
Now, there is a way you can make a lot of dead cards very quickly, isn't there, Alex?
There absolutely is. And this brings us to my card. I'm probably going to butcher the name on this, but it is a Collector Ofi. Oofy or Oof, however it is you want to pronounce it. It is a 2/2 for 2, 1 and a green creature, Ofi. Activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated. This is an incredibly powerful effect, especially if you yourselves are running mana dorks, things like Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, Fyndhorn Elves to kind of move ahead in your game plan. but your opponents are based off of artifact ramp, so this completely shuts them down. Now, at $3.61, it is a great alternative to its counter, which is Null Rod, it itself being an artifact for also 2 mana, that is currently running around $50. And to add kind of icing on the cake, this card did come out of the first Modern Horizons set, so there were definitely some sleepers in it when the set came out. I was still running Blood Pot at the time, and it was a huge addition for me. I guess just the chef's kiss on this is the flavor text saying that he steals power from the treasure after treasure, and what does it do for the Oofy? Nothing. And that's kind of what it does. You've got this Oof, it does nothing for you, but it keeps your opponents from playing their artifacts, or using them, I should say.
Yeah, I love Collector Oof. It is a strong card. It makes your opponents say oof when you play oof, and it's got the pun power. It's got the everything good about it, basically. If you are trying to catch up with your opponents while they are trying to daisy chain ahead with artifact ramp, this is a really good way to put them back in line. It is a good counter if your metagame is starting to see a lot of players ramping out with lots of treasures. So maybe against your Prismari deck, Alex, I might have to slot this in a few times. No, this is a great call, and I think more people should know about it and should have access to it.
Cries and Urza. Yeah.
It shuts down a lot of the mana production from artifacts, and also will incidentally hit a couple other value artifact pieces like Sensei's Divining Top. Yeah, so it has a lot of uses. I like it.
I think our general impression then on these creatures is there are a lot of very affordable mana dorks. If you're running green and you're not specifically on a landfall strategy, you're probably doing well if you add cards like Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, Arbor Elves, Fyndhorn Elves, all very cheap right now. There are also some powerful stacks effects apart from Collector Oof and Notion Thief. Drannith Magistrate and Aven Mindcensor both make the list and are both very affordable cards to access. So there are a lot of powerful cards that are cheap to get in the creature category. Do you guys have any other closing thoughts on creatures before we start talking about spells?
It's good Fyndhorn Elves got reprinted when it did, because prior to its reprinting, it was not one of the affordable mana dorks to have.
No, only printed in Ice Age and then again in
From the
Vault 20?
Yeah.
And only one of them actually had art worth looking at.
Let's not go after the old magic art. Well, why don't we start talking about spells then? Instants and sorceries. For a format that is kind of defined by cards like Force of Will and Imperial Seal, there are still a lot of very affordable instants and sorceries that cover a wide variety of effects. In general, there's a lot of really great pieces of interaction and tutors to be found on this list of sub $5 cEDH staples that can be had on the cheap. The one that I want to talk about actually is Crop Rotation. Crop Rotation is an instant for a single green mana. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a land. Search your library for a land card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. This is sweet, it's simple, it will be replacing any one of your lands with a land that is more beneficial to you. You can use this to sacrifice a basic land you may already be stacked up on and go find your other colors that you need to advance your game plan. You can use this to go tutor up a powerful piece of utility land, and that might allow you to get ahead. It might get you the evasiveness you need. It might get you removal in the form of something like Blast Zone. Or you can just be that person and sacrifice your forest to go get a Gaia's Cradle. And now you are miles ahead of everybody else. This card kind of does it all, and as you are expanding your collection of real estate and your lands, it is just a nice card to have. It got expensive for a while, and it is weirdly cheap at the moment because it was reprinted in Double Masters as an uncommon.
It's a really flexible card. You can use it as a type of ritual by sacking a land to go get a land that produces more than one mana. You can do some pretty fancy stuff like going off on someone else's turn if you get Emergent Zone that lets all your spells be cast as instants. Yeah, it's very flexible.
When I had my Corvold Landfall deck together, it was a way for me to get a sack trigger out of Corvold, possibly search it for another land like a fetch that would net me another trigger. So in the right decks, it was also a form of getting the lands that you need, but also card draw.
All right, Jake, you've got our next card you want to talk about.
This is Eldritch Evolution, a green sorcery for 1 generic and 2 green. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. Search your library for a creature card with the mana value X or less, where X is 2 plus the sacrificed creature's mana value. Put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle, exile Eldritch Evolution. This is a green into play tutor. It is really flexible in that you can turn one of your dorks that has lived past its usefulness into a stacks piece, or potentially some removal for someone else's stacks piece by getting Reclamation Sage. You can turn one of your Llanowar Elves into a Reclamation Sage and pop an artifact or enchantment. You can also use it with your commander. So if you have a key card in your deck that is a creature that costs 2 or costs 2 more than your commander, you'll be able to constantly tutor for it. There are certain lists that take advantage of this, like Tassiger, who has Delve, so he winds up costing substantially less than his normal 6 printed mana cost. You can very reliably go through and pull out 8 mana cards from your deck that way.
It's a great card. I'm surprised it is still this cheap. I run it in just about all of my green decks that are going to be creature-based, and that tends to be most of my green decks, just, it's green. Galta absolutely runs it. A presumed green-black deck that I'm working on is going to run it. I just love this card. It is so efficient at turning a creature that has a so-so utility at the table at that point in time into something that is going to have significant impact for you. And it only gets better the more creatures you run.
Alrighty, and that brings it to me. So my choice for our Instants and Sorcery spell section is actually going to be a Braid. It is a 2 mana, 1 in red instant. That is a modal card. It has choose 1. A Braid deals 3 damage to target creature, or destroy target artifact at instant speed. So this is one of those very powerful effects to where if you're behind, if an opponent is resolving things like a Hull Breacher or Mana Dorks, and you want to even the field a bit, get rid of that Hull Breacher, get rid of that Craven Mind Sensor, things of that nature, you can abrade them away, and that will take care of it. Alternatively, if you have an artifact that's jamming you up, a Graph Digger's Cage, a Null Rod that might be in play, a Braid will remove it as well. So it's an incredibly efficient modular card that evolves to fit your needs at the time. Being aggressively costed at instant speed, it fits everything that a card like this would want to do.
I really, really love a Braid, and I really love that it is still a very affordable card. A Braid just does so much where even at 1 mana with some of the most efficient printings they've ever had, with things like Lightning Bolt and Smelt, they still just don't match the fact that both of those are printed on a single card. There is almost never an instance where a Braid is a dead card in your hand, and it having that instant speed is absolutely the icing on the cake that just makes it perfect.
Its flexibility and low mana cost are just key here, and that actually is something that I want to talk about with this list that we put together of all the budget cards in these instants and sorceries. There are a lot of answers on here. Lots of interaction of various types, either counterspells or removal or bounce. And I believe that one of the easiest ways to increase a deck's power level is to just include more interaction, so that you're not playing solitaire magic. You're actually interacting with other people's game plans and trying to prevent them from winning so that you can do your thing. And a lot of these cards are 1 mana removal or 1 mana counters, 2 mana counters, and they are all under $1. A couple of them go up to like $3-4, but it's very easy to include these into a deck list, which will help you be more relevant at higher power level tables.
Absolutely. Some of them have a little bit of a learning curve. Like, once you learn just how good silence is, it's hard to overstate, just how good silence is. But there's just so much good interaction to be had at such cheap costs. There's a lot of really good stuff here. I'm with you 110%, Jake.
Like we were talking about the flexibility of a Braid, you can get similar flexibility with Nature's Claim. It destroys an artifact or enchantment for 1 green mana. There's a variety of cheap counterspells that are a little more restrictive than vanilla counterspell, but they're still very flexible. They can hit a lot of things on the stack. So yeah, I think it would be worth checking out this list and seeing if you can squeeze a couple of these into your decks.
Absolutely. All right, guys, should we then move on to our non-creature permanents? This will include artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers, and lands that are all sub $5.
John, that's a lot of categories. Why are these all lumped together?
Well, have you seen the price of real estate right now?
Oh, trust me. Yes, I have. Yeah, so we did lump all these together because there are not quite as many on this list that are under $5, but there are still a few worth talking about.
Yeah, and one of the general themes is that there are still really good and really available mana rocks. One of the reasons we didn't want to talk just about artifacts is that most of them are going to include the cycle of 2-color talismans, which was completed in Modern Horizons 1 with the enemy-colored talismans, Arcane Signet, and then the Guild Signets that were originally printed in the original Ravnica block. Fellwar Stone also just barely makes it onto this list. These Signets talismans, these 2-mana rocks, are widely available. They are cheap to obtain, and they are really good to be able to run. But we wanted to pick some other things off this list that had a little bit more interesting things to talk about. And I'm going to talk about one of the lands that cost less than $5, and the card that I'm going to talk about is Spire of Industry. This is a non-basic land which enters the battlefield untapped. It taps for a colorless mana, or you can tap, pay 1 life, and add 1 mana of any color. You can only activate this if you control an artifact. Spire of Industry does a really good impression of much more expensive lands like City of Brass or Mana Confluence. It is much more easily obtainable, having been printed recently in Aether Revolt, and having a low price tag compared to Mana Confluence. This one only costs $1.42. If you are running a deck that is going to be reliant on artifact-based ramp, or especially if your deck is going to have a very heavy artifact theme to it, this is a really good way to diversify your mana base. And you don't need to worry about having a land that is just dead on the turns when you don't control an artifact, because it can still tap for colorless mana to get you those artifacts out.
That brings me to me, which is I'm going to be going with Wild Growth. It is a 1-mana enchantment for green. Enchant land. Whenever enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional green. It's the equivalent of having a mana dork that you can bring into play, but doesn't have the same vulnerability that a dork would have. You play a Landwar Elves or Finhorn Elves, and then it immediately gets abraded. Wild Growth kind of dodges those effects, so it can't be abraded out of play. It can't be destroyed by normal run-of-the-mill effects, as enchantments within cEDH are a bit harder to remove than artifacts or creatures are. So it nets you the same positive experience that a Mana Dork would, but in the form of an enchantment, for the same price.
Wild Growth is nice because it is that 1-mana play, it is simple, it is going to get you plenty of extra mana, and really the only way to remove it is with enchantment removal.
And it's only a little bit over a quarter.
Yep, exactly. Jake, we got one more card on our list that we're going to talk about today.
All right, I'm going to touch on Animate Dead, and just for fun, I'm going to read the original card text from Alpha. Animate Dead is an enchant dead creature for 1 generic and a black, and it reads, any creature in either player's graveyard comes into play on your side with -1 to its original power. If this enchantment is removed, or at the end of game, target creature is returned to its owner's graveyard. Target creature may be killed as normal. Just so you know that you can still kill the dead things. The current Oracle text is a little more wordy, but it's functionally the same thing. So I wanted to highlight this because it has a lot of flexibility. You can use it to cheat out big creature from your own graveyard. You can also use it to steal creatures from other people's graveyards if they are trying to do some kind of value with their own stuff. Reanimating someone else's win condition and holding it hostage on your side of the board and taking advantage of it is always really fun to do, and not so much fun for other people to have to deal with.
It's a powerful card. It is a cheap way to get a creature out of the graveyard with very minimal downside. Yeah, it's a little bit more vulnerable to removal than having just a reanimate effect, but it doesn't carry all those same downsides. And frankly, the -1 power is rarely going to be relevant for what you are doing with it. That'll bring us to our honorable mentions, cards that are not strictly on the cEDH staples list, but cards that we think are still really good and probably deserve to be played in more decks in general. Jake, why don't you take it away?
All right, so I wanted to highlight Everflowing Chalice. It is another mana rock. This one costs 0. It's an artifact. It has multi-kicker 2, which means you can pay 2 mana any number of times as you cast it. And it enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it for each time it was kicked. It has the ability to tap and add colorless for each charge counter on Everflowing Chalice. This is currently about $1. I think it's 99 cents for one of these printings. It has there's a threshold that I like to have of mana rocks that cost 2 or less that produce at least 1. And this scales upwards into the late game. So if you wind up drawing it late, you can always dump some extra mana into it and have a very big, flexible, colorless, gilded lotus type of effect. You can also just play it on 2 to get a decent rate mana rock. And then there's rarely, but occasionally, situations where just playing it for 0 to up your storm count or to get something in play that you can sacrifice is a useful play.
It's one that's honestly fallen out of my rotation, but I don't really have a reason why it has. So, Jake, thanks for reminding me this card was still a thing.
Yeah, I generally only have it in like monocolor or maybe 2-color decks that don't have a decent amount of dork access or something along those lines. But and once you get into like 3-color decks, you're going to have access to, 6 signets and 6 talismans, and you don't really need these subpar ones. But for 1-color decks, it's pretty helpful.
Absolutely. Alex, what is the card that's going to be your honorable mention?
My honorable mention is actually a new one out of Strixhaven. It is Solve the Equation. It is a sorcery for 3, 2 and a blue, and it says, search the library for an instant or sorcery card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, and then shuffle. So it is a tutor effect that is a bit more costed than things like Demonic Tutor, Imperial, things of that nature, but it's at a decent price point. It'll let you get any instant or sorcery from your deck into your hand, so you can immediately turn and play it. So it is good early game if someone doesn't really want to waste a spell counting you then, but also late game where you can search for what you're looking for and then immediately turn around and cast it. And at its current price point, I think it's a bargain.
I really hope we see more effects like this. I would like to see additional tutors, particularly at that 3 mana cost, if they are limited tutors like that, especially for instants and sorceries, just because I'm building an Izzet deck right now and trying to tune it, and having a few more tutors to get my win conditions would be great. I will take the last card on our honorable mentions list, formerly on the cEDH staples list, and that is Grafdigger's Cage, a 1-mana artifact which reads, creature cards in graveyards and libraries can't enter the battlefield, and players can't cast spells from graveyards or libraries. This is a powerful stacks piece at a very low cost that shuts down a lot of the most powerful things you can be doing in Magic. It shuts down ways that you're going to be tutoring creatures from people's libraries onto the battlefield. We talked about Eldritch Evolution earlier with that. This card saw a lot of play in cEDH as it shut down a lot of Protean Hulk-based strategies because it would be tutoring creatures out of the library into play. Well, it put a stop to that. It also incidentally stopped Reanimator strategies from taking over as well, knocking a lot of powerful Reanimator decks essentially out of the format. And it also incidentally stops people from using Flashback off of cards like Snapcaster Mage or the flipped version of Jace Vryn's Prodigy. It also stops Underworld Breach altogether. All of these are some of the most powerful effects you can be doing in Magic in general, and Grafdigger's Cage stops all of them for a single mana, and it is dirt cheap right now thanks to its reprint.
This is definitely one of those cards where if it does not directly impact your deck, it is a very low price to include in your own deck to hose a bunch of other people very easily.
You can reach the crew from Gemstone Mine on Twitter at GemstoneMineMTG, or send us an email at gemstoneminepodcast@gmail.com. On YouTube, we're Gemstone Mine Podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.